Hello, welcome to the Blushing Blooms video tutorial. This is just a quick look of what you're going to find in your kit or in your pattern. You can probably skip this, but if you're new to embroidery, you might want to check it out. All right, so if you grab the kit, it's going to look something like this, or if you bought it at a shop, it's going to look a little bit different, but the contents are going to be the same. You're going to have your printed fabric inside, looks like this. These lines are permanent, so you're going to want to make sure that you cover these guidelines with your stitches. You are going to have some embroidery floss in your kit, likely these 5 colors. I talked to my patrons on Patreon and they want to see me stitch in these colors, so I'm going to be doing a purple version on camera, but this is the original version that is likely in your kit. You'll notice that my sample hoop is framed in a rubber hoop. Your kit does not include the rubber hoop. If you want to frame yours in a hoop like this, you can buy it separately. This is the small size. Your kit is going to come with a hoop that looks like this, but it won't be bound. However, you might want to bind it. If you are getting a kit or a hoop from me, please feel free to just put in the comments, please send me some fabric scraps to bind my hoop. I have tons of fabric scraps. I would love to send you some. So you can see this is just a strip of fabric that I have wound around my hoop here. If you want to be like super professional, you can add a stitch here to kind of keep it secure, or just like tuck it in and be lazy like me. So when you hoop up, just make sure your little fabric is tucked in there. Center the printed fabric on the hoop. You're going to grab the top hoop, make a sandwich, and at this point I'm kind of close to the edges here, so I'm going to pull here. I'm going to tighten here, and I'm going to go around and pull, 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 pull. You want this super tight. Listen, you want to be able to hear it. You don't want to be able to like push it and have it saggy, okay? So if you need to get it even tighter, you can grab a screwdriver, get in here, and super tighten it up, all right? All right, you're also going to have some embroidery needles. I guess I should fetch some before I get started here. You're going to want some scissors. They don't have to be this fancy looking. I always grab a pen, basically for when I need to mark stitch direction. Not required. It's going to get stitched over, so if you can use a pencil or whatever, no one's going to see it. I think the only other thing is when using these full skeins of floss, what you're going to do is you're going to pull a length. If you pull from the side that has the number on it, you're going to have a much easier time. So I pull, I don't know, I've been told from the tip of your finger to your elbow, right? So that's, I don't know, I feel like that's too short. I go longer than that. All right. All right, I'm actually had to get a needle. Okay, so I have my cut length. I'm gonna thread my needle like this. Takes a little practice. There we go. So that would be a full 6 ply, a full 6 strands on my needle. When I stitch, I don't stitch with this overlapped part. I'm going to stitch with this, okay? To start, if you want, you can just tie a little knot, all right? It's fine. I'll show you as we move on other ways to anchor your floss to your fabric. But this would be stitching with a full 6 ply. Another way to stitch with 6 ply, let's say you're having a hard time getting your thread through your needle here. So if you separate your floss, see how you can see there's 6 different ply in there. So just grab half of it. So I guess in theory you're supposed to just pull one at a time, but I like to live dangerously. This is how dangerous my life gets these days. So I am just kind of working this twistiness that happens down so I don't get a huge knot. All right, so I've got just 3 ply here. Then it's only half the thickness, right? So I'm gonna thread my needle and overlap all the way, so that when I stitch, I'm only stitching with this overlap section, okay? So that's kind of a sneaky way to do it. Otherwise, as we stitch, if we're just stitching with 3-ply in this example, we would, as we go, give ourselves more and more and more to work with, and this tail is going to get shorter and shorter and shorter until we're almost out, and then we would tie off the end there. So likewise, when we're just using a single ply, you're just going to grab one of these, pull it out. And see, it's a little easier to just do one at a time, but so that's it. That's pretty much all you need to know to get started. So let's do this. Okay, so I am going to start with my darkest color. In this case, I'm using the purples. So I'm just going to start with a little knot because the first stitch we're going to do is a woven wheel. And I just find it easier to start with a little tiny knot. So I am currently upside down. And the reason for that is it's just hard to stitch in my clamp here from the bottom. So I turned my hoop upside down. I'm going to be working here, 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 all the same thing. So we're starting with this giant rose. Not where I really want to start, but it makes the most sense. So we are going to go and do our spokes first. So you could use like any colors you want for this. Like if you have the kit, obviously you probably wanted those colors, but if you're doing like the digital pattern and you want to try other colors, you could do, you could do every stitch a different color. You could do every motif a different color. You could use 4 colors like I did and do the darker color on the bottom and move up to the lighter color. So that's what I'm doing here. So I just changed to this fun purple color, which feels very springy. So if you're curious about this fabric, I was asked, is that mint? And I was like, oh no, that is not mint. And it's not exactly mint. I went and compared it to the Kona color chart, and it's really close to mint. It's in between mint and spring, is what I would say. Spring is like basically a darker version of this, and mint is a mintier version of it. Oops, I am already, I've gotten myself tangled on the, oh gosh, that was weird. I got tangled on the screw of my hoop. It was like some kind of crazy nautical knot. Like, I don't know how I did that, but it was strangely difficult to remove. Not a good start. Okay. All right, so there's our spokes. With a woven wheel this large, I feel like 7 is a good number of spokes. So you're going to come up. I don't care where you come up. Just come up between 2 of the spokes. And then we're going to start weaving. I pulled some kind of fuzz up. There we go. So I like to go counterclockwise, probably because I'm right-handed. So go over and then under, over and then under, over and under. I think I'm probably, I'll demo this a few more laps, but here I'm getting stuck on my fabric. I'm going to actually remove my hoop from the clamp because I find this stitch way easier to do if I can rotate the hoop. So I'm not having to do this weird passing back and forth of the needle between my 2 hands. So I'm going to go and go and go. I might need another strand of floss. If you run out of floss and need to get more as you're working on this, you're just going to go to the back of the fabric with your needle, weave into the spokes from the back, and grab some more floss. You just want to be careful because there's a chance you could kind of change the tension on your floss at that point. what tends to happen is when you go down and do that anchoring, you're pulling tighter on these weaves here. So you're going to see like a dent in your flower where you had to go get more floss. So just be mindful of that. All right, I will meet you back here. It feels like it's going to be forever, but hopefully it won't be. Okay, so I am pretty much out of floss. I can make it maybe a couple more stitches, but I'm going to be very mindful here that I'm not tugging too tight and that I'm maintaining the same tension that I started with. I think subconsciously, like when we're running out of floss, that's another time when we might start to pull like tighter because you want to make it, you know? Okay, so that's probably good without being too risky. So I'm going to go, I just went under this spoke. I know it gets kind of hard to see once we're near the edges. And then I'm going to go down on the other side of this spoke, the next one. Honestly, it doesn't really matter where you're going to go down. No one's going to be able to see that. So here I come to the back. Here's that fuzzy that I grabbed earlier. Okay, so I am just going to weave under one of these and over one. I'm just making this up. I'm just somehow going to anchor under here. What you could do is, let's see, we could do like a knot. Let's see, over something like this. It's kind of a knot. Oh yeah, I like that. Just don't pull too tight. You know, it's kind of loose. And then I'm going to just trim that. I'm going to grab my next length. And you know, I think I'm actually going to just anchor this one with a knot as well. Because I think the woven wheels are hard to weave into because there's not much to grip on, simply because those stitches are so big. Okay, so now I'm going to come up. It doesn't really matter where. Like, I think I'm going to come up so that I go over this spoke since it's the most obvious one sticking out still. So, just coming up a little ways away from it. If you can try to like come up under your stitches, like kind of tucked in, if that makes sense. So almost like you kind of like lift up the side and come up from under there. Okay, so I'm going to go over, under, oops, whoops, whoops, whoops. Sorry, I have a new setup. I've always got a new setup I'm trying. We actually rearranged the whole studio. So I'm stitching kind of at a new table setup. These big ones get real boring, I'll be honest with you. Luckily, this is the biggest woven wheel rows we're doing. So they get easier from here. If you're doing this and just having a horrible time, you might want to just skip this one and do one of the smaller ones first for practice. As far as this clump of flowers go, the reason I did it first is because I didn't want to have to do all this weaving with these stitches already done and be constantly worried about stabbing the other stitches. So just now, I don't know if you realize, I pushed down on my already completed weaving as I pulled through because I thought I had snagged something. I think that's something I didn't need to do it there because it didn't look like I snagged anything, but that's what was going on. Sometimes I don't realize what I'm doing until I'm like filming I realized I should explain myself. Like, I didn't even know that was a thing I did. Okay, I see a little bit of my guideline here still. I'm going to go a couple more times around. At this point, I feel like the further you go on your rows, the more gentle you need to be on that tension so that you're not creating like a volcano. So here you can see it looks like I pierced another strand. So that's why I'm holding that strand still while I pull this through. Okay. I didn't mean to pierce it. It's just, it's hard as you get towards the edges here to not. I mean, if you do something like this and kind of wiggle around and make sure you're not piercing anything, that's good. But I don't always do that. All right, I think I'm done here. So I'm going to go down the needle here. And then if there's anywhere, like I kind of tease a little bit and see like, okay, I'm tucking that bit in. Actually, that looks better. That kind of helps the shape a bit. I thought maybe I would do a stitch over here, but I think that looks fine. So we can actually move on. Let me get re-clamped here while I think what I want to do next. I'm going to get some extra light on here because that purple is just, it's so dark. Hopefully that kind of helps a little bit. I'll lighten things up here. Okay, what should we do next? Let's do this flower. So that's going to be satin stitch. So stitch direction on this guy is just radial from center, which means just you're kind of following along with the petals. I used a full 6 strand for these guys. If that's too thick for you, please feel free to use fewer strands. So I'm just going to pick a petal, doesn't matter which petal, and see when I come up, I'm going outside of my guideline, right? Because I want to make sure it's covered. Sometimes if you go right through your guideline, you might have a little bit showing through. So I'm just barely outside of it. All right, let me see how I did these. Okay, I don't know, that wasn't helpful. So I'm just going down in the center. I'm going to do these petals one at a time. So I'm going to move to one side here. And for this first one, I'm going to kind of tuck under here. See, I'm using my needle to do that. So these stitches aren't quite parallel like I indicated they would be. They're just a little bit tilted towards the center. I thought I was going to need another stitch, but that looks like I covered it. All right, so now I'll do the other side. The reason I do the center stitch first is to help guide the rest of the guidelines. If I know I want the middle to be straight, then that's where I start. I thought I had like a hair there. I need glasses. Okay, there's one petal. Let's do 4 more. So really only that first center stitch goes directly in the center of the flower. Oh, I'm so sorry. I've been covering my light as I do this, haven't I been? Let's see. I know I have my, now that I've added an extra light source. That purple just looks really weird on my camera. room for one stitch here. So I'm kind of tucking it in here. I don't know. There's potentially room for another stitch there. There's a tiny bit of the guideline showing. I'm going to see how it turns out. Okay. So satin stitch is another one where we do want to be mindful of how tight we're pulling. We just want these stitches to lay like flat and comfortable on top of the fabric. In fact, for these, I'm almost keeping them a little loose so they're kind of puffy. See, now I definitely want to come back on this petal because I don't want these petals to look all skinny. I want them to look more like that and that. Voluptuous petals. Oops, I was about to lose my tail. So another trick you can do is kind of come under all your stitches and do something like that to make them equally puffy. Okay, so I think next I could do this little satin stitch bud here, but I think just to mix it up, because we just did a bunch of satin stitch, we're going to jump over here so you can see this color extends all the way to this flower. So this is going to be a chain stitch rose. So you can see in the center there's a tiny little dot, and we're going to start with a French knot. So we're going to come up on or near the center. The easiest way to do a French knot is just with a single wrap. The more wraps, the harder it is to pull through, and this is such a tiny space that a single wrap is just fine. So wrap once, place your needle back down near the center, pull off to the left, in my case, pop. So when you do that pull, you're getting that wrap down to the fabric before you pull it through. Otherwise, you're going to have a tough time. Okay, if you want to do like any other kind of knot there, that's fine. If you're not into French knots, you can skip it. I just like having something to stitch around. What else could you put there? Let me think about that. All right, so now I'm just going to do chain stitch around. So if you have no idea how to do chain stitch, I would recommend looking at a video really quick before trying to watch me do it in a spiral. Okay, so I just went up and came back down the same hole. I left a loop. I'm actually going to go counterclockwise. So I'm going to come up pretty close. I'm making really tiny stitches. So I'm coming up, you know, along my spiral path. Okay, so since there's really no room for me to do it right there, so I'll show you here. It's like we're going to be doing this, okay? Spiraling out from the center. So the smaller my stitches, the tighter my spiral, the more stitches I'm going to get in there for more coverage. And then if you make your stitches loose, like the poofier it's going to be. So there's a lot of room for variation here depending on how tight your spiral is, how small your stitches are, how loose your stitches are. All right, so I'm going down where I came up, making another loop, coming up along that spiral, catching my loop. And again, down where I came up, coming up a stitch length away, catching the loop, pulling through, and repeat. If you love doing these and don't like doing woven wheel, you can always just do a bunch of these roses instead, or vice versa. If you're not a fan of these, you can just do more woven wheel, or what else could you do? There's a lot of different rose stitches, none of which I can recall at this current moment in time. Stem stitch. Oh my gosh. That was the other one I was thinking of. I've been doing a lot of stem stitch lately on another project, and I couldn't believe I couldn't remember what it was called. These kind of look like berries to me. If you ever pull too tight, you can always come back in and tease out. Kind of undo a little bit. I love it. I really want blackberries now. This one's a little tricky because sometimes it's hard to get a perfectly round shape. So I'm actually going to stop here. I'm going to go down I'm going to make this anchor stitch a little bit longer than I would normally on chain stitch, just to kind of round out my shape. And actually I think that looks okay. I was going to maybe add a stitch over here, but you know, it's going to be next to this rose, so I think it's going to be fine. So that's that one. Excellent. All right, so I'm going to do this tiny bud here, and stitch direction on this one is just like that, just kind of parallel. Let's see, what did I call it? I think I called it horizontal to the base of the, I don't know. Sometimes it's easier to show than to try to explain. You possibly might want to stitch those leaves first. I kind of go back and forth with which I prefer. I think it'll be fine like this. So it's essentially what we just did on that daisy. This one I really am keeping my stitches parallel to each other though, or at least that's what I'm intending to do. I just kind of, I decided I didn't like where I had put that stitch down, so I pulled out my needle. I erased my hole by doing that scratchy thing. That's what was just happening there. Don't forget your needle is a tool. Thought I was gonna have to play a little bit harder of a game of thread chicken on this, but doing okay. Okay, so actually at this point I'm pretty much out of floss, so I just want to show you back my hoop. Now that I have a lot more to weave into, I'm actually just going to weave back through like that. And that's probably fine. Some people like to do it twice just to be extra super careful. Unless you have someone coming up to your work with tweezers trying to pull out your stitches, I think just once is fine. But obviously if you're going to stitch something like this onto like clothing or a quilt, you'll... Okay, so I missed one of my ply, is what happened there. Let me give this a snip. Make it a little easier on myself. The worst part of embroidery, right? Okay, so I am going to go, let's do this one next. So I'm going to weave in on my daisy something like this. That'll work. And I'll be coming up in the center of my daisy there. All right, locked back in, safety first. Okay, so now we're doing, let's see, what are these called? Double detached chain stitch or triple detached chain stitch. So this one's a pretty good size. Well, let's see, what did I do before? Well, it looks like I only needed 2 to fill that size. So these might take a little trial and error. I really wasn't sure how to designate them on our pattern or the fabric here, but I just had to make something up. So You just want to make sure that by the time you're done, you've covered the guidelines. So I'm starting the center. I'm going to go down the hole I came up. I'm going to do this petal first. So I'm going to come up. How far is that? 2/3 of the way up? Maybe a little higher? 3/4 of the way up? Pull. Anchor. I think it looks kind of cool. You can see how I have the centers of these. You can still see, right? I think it looks cool. If you don't like the fabric showing through, you might want to do like a back stitch in there. I just think it adds kind of something different, you know? All right, so now I'm going to come up the same hole again. Down the same hole again. And I'm going to come up where I went down to anchor the previous detached chain so that my anchor stitches end up touching. And I pull slowly so that in theory it just wraps around my previous stitch. You might need to use your needle to kind of help it and guide it do that. That one worked out very, very well. It's just so dang dark. I feel like this light isn't even helping though. Oh geez. You can kind of see more of the detail there, but good thing we're going to be doing this with 3 other colors. All right. So the way I like to do it is I do every other petal, which will make sense once I get to the other petals. We'll call these the forward petals, the front petals. And they all start from the center, or very close to the center. I don't know how that just magically works. Like I was like, oh, I don't think that one's gonna work. I don't think it's gonna lay flat. This one we might want to fake. Because it's so close. Because I don't really want it to overlap my flower. This one. I don't know. I guess we'll just do it and see how it looks. Oops. There we go. I had some kind of knot that wanted to happen. So let's see. I think it's okay. My floss is kind of beat up, so it's separating a little bit, but I think that's gonna work. Okay, so once we do the back ones, so I'll start on this one. So instead of going right to the center, I'm just kind of going to where I can see at the base of it. And I'll go back down that same hole and do my 3/4 up from the center of the petal, or flower, excuse me. So for the next stitch though, I'm not gonna go, actually in this case we probably can go out where we came in. You can see it's a little higher up. Actually, maybe on the way down. So on the way down, I think I'm gonna come off to the side a little bit so it turns into more of a fly stitch since we're not going back down that hole we came up. And it's gonna be more obvious when you do the larger flowers like this. Let's see, I didn't really do it on that one. Maybe it won't be as obvious. Actually, it looks the most obvious here. I don't know if you can see this fly stitch right here. It's not that it's a detached chain stitch and it's just hidden behind here. You can see right there, that's where it comes out, right? So that's a U, that's not a connected shape, which is way easier to see with that lighter colored floss. Note to self. I just feel weird starting at the top. That's why I started from the bottom. I don't know why. Here I am. It's weird to start at the top, and I'm actually stitching on the top of my hoop, even though it's the bottom design. I'm full of contradictions today. So here's my fly stitch. So if this is like annoying to you, like you think you want to do your woven wheel first because this is getting so close here, that's totally fine. I really struggle with the woven wheels and not stabbing anything in the vicinity, so I would just hate to do all your other stitches and ruin them when you're doing all your weaving. All right, last one. Great, so I went ahead and did my other spirally chain stitch rows. I think the last thing we need to do is this little bud over here. This bud is also going to be in your darkest color, so I'm going to stitch that when I'm done, but we already stitched one here, so stick around if you want to watch the end. Okay, so for this bud, we're treating is the word I'm looking for. We're treating each of these 3 segments kind of independently. So stitch direction is more angled for these. But that looks awfully parallel, doesn't it? I would say it's more like doing 3 of these just closer together. Again, if you want to do the greenery surrounding first, like if you want to do the stem, leaves, that's fine. I'm just sticking with our theme of stitching one color at a time for our club stitch along. So if you're watching this on YouTube in the future. Hello. Hopefully you can join us next time for a stitch along. Alright. Let's take another stitch here. And once we do the leaves on either side, we can kind of cover up. We'll be able to cover up how I'm kind of uneven here. Same with back over here. How it's a little bit uneven, you'll be able to cover that up with your leaf stitches. Like this one's especially out of place. That's okay. We're gonna hide it. That's like done. I feel like it needs a stitch here to kind of push this stitch up. So I'm gonna do that. I don't know if that was where I wanted to come up. I really want to kind of get under my first stitch, but I don't know. This one I'm like tucking under here basically to give that a bit more fullness. All right, and so then there are French knots on the tips of these. We'll come back and connect them once again. So we do a single wrap. Place your needle down near where you came up. Pull to the left to get that knot down to the base of the fabric. Make sure, hold on, I'm getting my finger up in there because I want to make sure. One of the problems with binding your hoop is there is the risk of stitching into that binding. And I was afraid I was about to do that, so try that again. I just feel like I'm going through more. There we go. I was catching it. I feel there was a little more that I was having to stab through than I was expecting to. Right, 2 French knots. Okay, so we're gonna do triple on this. So I'm gonna call that 2/3 of the way up. You probably could just do double still. You'll just have like that first stitch will have to be bigger, which means you're just gonna have a bigger. Sorry, my husband is announcing that the salsa is hot. He forgot I was filming. It is really hot. Okay, here's my last one. There we go. So that's what it looks like with 3. There's a lot of floof going on down there. And once again, it's like, I swear I started at the center, but because I keep adding on stitches, I'm like moving in the opposite direction. So I feel like that's a lesson there, is that I need to start kind of more over to the side. I'm almost out of floss here, so it's a little awkward. Okay, so since this one, you can kind of see this separated a bit, I'm going to try to connect them back together. just doesn't really want to hang out with the others. Let's see, do I have enough floss? It's pretty tight. I'm gonna go ahead and get some more. I'm almost out of this color. I'm hoping I have more in my drawer. Otherwise, we're in trouble. Okay. Right, Biscuit? Alright, I'm gonna come down here. Oops. I'm gonna have to anchor that later. I just don't want a big old knot underneath here where I'm already gonna have a lot of floss coming in and out. There's no room. Uh-oh. Alright, I just screwed that up. So when I went up, I disrupted the previous anchor, which I'm going to feel for from the back, and I'm pulling it down. So I was able to recover that okay. I'm a little nervous about this because it is so poofy. I'm really afraid it's going to get caught on something. Or rather, I'm going to catch it on something. Let's be honest here. Okay, so what am I going to do here? I'm going to fake it. Alright, so I'm going to go down here. And up here on the other side. Make sure this has enough give. I'm going to hold it down with my finger while I pull through so that I don't accidentally pull it. So technically I need another one, even though we won't see a lot of it. I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to see how it looks here. I'm going to come and do this petal first. I'm afraid it's gonna, because I'm doing like the fake stitches, I'm afraid it's gonna be too bulky at the base of the petal, because right now it's already as thick as the other ones. If you don't like doing the fakey versions, like I'm having to do here, and we did for the second one as well, we had to fake some of it because it was underneath something. You can always stitch them complete first and then stitch the other stuff on top of them. I feel like these don't need to be triple. These back ones. Oh, what has happened? I feel like that looks fine. Let's look what I did before. Oh, well, so you can see this is a lot more voluptuous, huh? Alright, I guess maybe I'll do 3. Because why use all 6 strands if you're not going for a voluptuous look, right? Okay, I've decided to come up here. And I'm gonna go in here for these fake stitches. They look pretty fake though. I'm hoping that once I get those other petals in, that'll look more believable. I don't know. Let's see. This is only 2. That one I only did 2 because I just crashed into that thing and I was like, I'm done. But I can tell now that I'm looking at it that that petal looks kind of goofy. Troubleshooting on the spot here. Biscuit on here, a little close. No. Okay, he's pulling on the thread from underneath. It's a little more than just watching. Okay. That's looking okay. All right. There, last one down here. Well, what do we think? I think it actually came together okay. It was looking a little rough there for a minute. I was getting nervous. Well, I went ahead and jumped ahead. I'm pretty much done with the lightest color. There was really nothing new to say. I did just leave this open so you could see that, we did this flower first because it was the darker color. And so in this case, you can see here on my sample hoop, I actually did the opposite. I did this petal first and then I made it so that this petal was behind, but in this case, it's going to be opposite. So I'll just show you what that's going to look like because I'm going to have to stitch up to this darker flower here and make it look like this petal is actually behind it. So after this, it's kind of fun. We get to go back and do a little bit of blending between the two colors. I'm going to show a little bit of that here. good place to be creative. You can do as much or little of it as you want. You could just add the little straight stitch details I'm doing, or get more into it and add, you know, full-on flowers if you want to do little lazy daisies or little flowers made of straight stitches. This one was laying kind of weird. Alright, I think I have one more stitch to do here. Like so. Alright, so I'm actually, let's see, in my sample I did a French knot here. So these ones I did a little bigger, so I think I did like double wraps. So 1, 2, place my needle down, bring towards surface, and pop through. I actually forgot to do the French knots here. They're supposed to be the other color, but I'm going to do them with this color since I have a whole bunch of it. You'll notice it won't really make any difference to the design that I'm doing it a different color. And then from here, we will jump. Let's see, I didn't do, oopsies, uh-oh, there. That was almost a disaster. I really didn't use too much of this light color. It looks like I just added French knot over here, and then I did these French knots over here. Let's see if I can refocus the camera over there. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm jumping way over here. That's quite a ways. If you want to actually anchor before doing that, that wouldn't be wrong. Alrighty. And then I have my next color. So I've got my slightly darker color here. It's the second lightest color. And with this, it looks like I'm adding, let's see if I can find them all. I have a French knot here. I don't even know where that's coming from. Okay. And then I am doing straight stitches on this flower. So if you look at the sample, you can see they're pretty small. They don't really reach all the way to the end. What is that? Maybe halfway, a little less than halfway up it goes. But really, it's up to you how high. I recommend when doing this to really pierce a strand rather than go in between strands. If you go in between strands, see how it kind of splits? Let's see if I can maybe get on here a little better. So when I'm in between, it splits, but if I try to go through, you can see I don't really create that split as much. So I'm just starting from the out and going to the center. Don't pull too hard, because then again you're gonna create more of a dent in your flower. We want these to be kind of just resting on top. That takes a couple, oops, oh geez. Takes a couple tries to split that stitch. etc. So just grab the next color. We'll add detail on here. Oh, you know what? I missed one. I see it. I forgot to go back up. So I'll stick with it. So actually we're gonna bring this color up as well. So I'm gonna come, let's see, where do I want to go first? There's really no great option. We'll go over here first, up to the upper right. So I have, see, I have a French knot in this little gap. Oops. 1 and 2 wraps. That looks nice. And then the same straight stitches. See, like really what I'm doing is I'm trying to split. I don't know if you could see the difference there. Here I'm splitting, I think it's the same stitch, but I'm in between ply. I'm actually trying to split a ply is what I'm doing. I don't know if you can see, I just did it. That's gonna be the best as far as leaving any kind of, leaving the least amount of a dent in there. Sometimes it just happens easy, randomly. Other times you kind of have to hunt for it. Okay, I'm running out of this color here, so I'm gonna have to go get some more, but just keep finishing that up. Add your French knots over to the left here now. And if you have any gaps, and you want to add more, like really there's a gap here too. If you want to add a French knot here or a French knot there, you can add as many or as few as you want to fill those in, or if you want to have some gaps, that's fine. Also, when we, next we're going to do the green. So that's another option, is to fill some of those gaps with some green, whether you use French knots or a different stitch. Okay, we are almost done. So hopefully you have most of your flowers done at this point. And I'm going to show you guys how I did the stems and the leaves. There's really not much to it. So I'm just using a single strand for the stems here. And I'm doing backstitch. So you have to be pretty precise if you're using this printed fabric, because you know, a single strand is super duper skinny. So really be mindful that you're covering your guidelines, because it's just thick enough to exactly cover your guideline. If you're not into backstitch, you could always use stem stitch, split stitch, whatever you want. And you can even go thicker here. If you think these are too skinny, you can double it and use 2-ply. So I'm doing this for these stems, and then also on these flowers here for these stamen up here. And really, I mean, at this point, it's such a small distance. I think this is just going to be a single straight stitch. On some of the longer ones, you might fit in 2 stitches, call it a back stitch. But for here, we're just going to do it like that. So I'm going to jump over here, do the same thing. You're kind of going to be jumping around your project doing this, and that's okay. If you want to weave along the back side of your work as you go to kind of anchor the back side down, that's fine. Okay. For me, it makes sense to start at one side and then move to the other. But it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be a little bouncing around you're going to need to do. I think now I kind of need to go north and hit this one. Okay, so continue with that, and then I jumped up to 3-ply to do the leaves. I think this also looks good with 2-ply. I think if you do it with a single ply, it's going to be a little, I mean, it's definitely possible, but it'll definitely take a little longer. And actually, if you want to use 6-ply, you could use 6-ply. Have it just as thick as the petals. That's fine too, especially I think for the buds that would look good. These super skinny leaves that are all over the place, maybe dropping down. I feel like I'm stuck, but I'm not. So what's nice here is with this stitch, I'm kind of covering the edge of those satin stitches that we did earlier. Kind of hiding any mistakes there. Let's see. I don't think I need another stitch there, so we're good. I'll move to this one. I feel like this is kind of the fun part. Just filling in these last green details and watching the whole piece come together. Did I ever even do a stitch on this side? I don't think I did. This leaf kind of ended up with a weird shape. But it works. Alright, so with these ones, they're so skinny that some of them are just 2 stitches, some of them are a single stitch. And you can add more as well. If you feel like you're kind of missing the detail of these little leaves, this would be a good place to drop down to just 2-ply. Teller's here now. Hey buddy, he's kind of blocking our light, but I'll forgive him. Hey buddy, nothing here for you. It's covered with just 2 stitches. I still start in the middle, and then I find that I do my next stitch and it kind of pushes it over. Let's see. Probably one more here. Oh, Teller. He's about to knock a bunch of stuff over. It's quite early for this behavior. Usually it means it's time for some dinner, but it's not dinner time. I'm not sure what he's thinking. I think it was fun to try a different color. It's neat to see how the feeling kind of changes, the vibe of the piece changes depending on the colorway. I picked this green because it felt just like a slightly darker color than the fabric itself. I almost went, I'll show you just so you can see what a difference it would make. I almost went with this kind of, let me use my other light if that can help. Maybe you can see more detail of that color. It's like a very grassy, it has a lot more yellow in it than the one I'm using. But it would have given definitely a different feel, a much brighter look there. I went with this one because I feel like it'll match the original one better. So when I take pictures of them together, they'll look a little bit more like a set. I was afraid the other one would clash with the original colors. This version's more neutral. So I'm just going to keep going here. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves. I hope you've created something beautiful. I hope you've learned something. And here, let me show you though, if you do want to add, I mentioned you can like add green in here. You could just come in and just do a couple of stitches. I think we'll just call them satin stitches, I guess, just teeny tiny, to kind of fill that in. Just be careful and make sure you're coming up and going down kind of tucked under, so you get that feeling of depth there, that green is behind and not just some weird triangle sitting on top. That's it, I think. Okay, have fun.